Welcome to the Dennis Report. I'm Dennis Atchison. Our provincial narrative often speaks to forestry and its needs, often speaks to economy and the needs to build a better New Brunswick that way. But how often do we get to talk about food and farming and our relationship with each other through both of those practices? Today's guest is going to expose us not only to how food and how we eat it, how we prepare it, how we grow it, how we get it to market connects us all, but it'll also speak a little bit to how social entrepreneurship and information technology, or IT, is making its way into those areas as well. So let's go explore how food connects us all. We're really pleased today to have Levi Lawrence here from Real Food Connections. Welcome, Levi.
Thank you.
So there's lots of pieces to this character, so it's going to be fun to learn. The theme is about food, but before the show we started talking and you're opening a new location in St. John. So how's that going for you?
It's going well. The project is actually to change us from a one city focused retail store, which currently we're in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and bringing us to where we're a provincial company. And that expansion involves us opening a retail location in St. John, as you mentioned, but also it involves us becoming a small-scale distributor for locally raised foods or produced foods everywhere in southern New Brunswick to begin. So that distribution of, a box of things to a pallet of things, there's nobody filling that need for perishable or food regulated like food safety items, cheese, meat, dry goods, produce. So it's a fairly aggressive and comprehensive project, but we're quite excited about it, and it's been 2 or 3 years in the planning.
Yes, you've been at this for a while too. How long has Real Food Connections been up and going?
Real Food Connections started somewhere around 4.5 years ago, and it started as, I'll be honest, it started actually as a university project when I was doing entrepreneurship, as a connection between the chef and the farmer. I'm an ex-chef myself, and that's considered my trade, and I also knew that I grew up on a farm, and I knew sort of the value of real food and the work that goes into it, and I knew that customers were looking for more and more real food, and I had worked in overseas and I worked in other provinces. Yeah. And then I get to this point, it's like, okay, let's connect them. They're busy people, lots of ego, no time. Put a business plan together. I went in, and the farmers thought it was great. I met 30 farmers, got an idea what they're producing. I went into the kitchens, and as a chef, the people in the kitchens in Fredericton, which is where I started it, I knew them. It's a small world.
Yeah, your network.
And even though they're friends of mine, I went in and they said, oh, we can't buy your stuff. And it wasn't the price. I mean, the price would be a little bit higher on a lot of things. It was the inconsistencies, the seasonality, the difficulties, the not knowing, I can't put it on the menu because I don't know if you're going to have it 2 weeks from now. There was a lot of difficulties. So I said, oh, well, that's a bad business idea. But the same people who said no to that said that their families would, everything that made it difficult for them to buy it as a restaurant, their families would enjoy and would add value to them. The seasonality, the different qualities of things, the education, knowing where it comes from. So we pivoted, we changed, and that was about 4 years ago. We changed and we became a consumer focused, getting the food that grows in our region. So for us, the region's mostly southern New Brunswick, to the people who live in that region. And it's been a wild ride since. We've expanded twice, and we're now considering a third time.
Thinking a story, it was maybe 5-6 years ago. I was in St. John at one of the eateries there, and asking the server, well, where's this come from? And it took a bit of prodding, but what was fascinating was she had it. She had the whole story. The bread comes from here, the meat comes from there, the veggies come from there, and we thought, oh, you should put that on the menu. Because that local food thing could be a good driver for New Brunswick in terms of, one, we know where our food's coming from, so we feel good about that. We did it ourselves, so we feel good about that. But then when those cruise ships land in St. John, or when there's tourists, wouldn't it be an interesting section of a menu or the grocery store? We tend to focus more on the grocery store, whereas the local food section, to have the same thing in our food supply when we're at a restaurant.
It's funny you mentioned St. John, because we've been doing this fundraiser investment share offering for our expansion, and St. John's community, especially the restaurant community, it's been very collaborative, very interested, very passionate. We've had 5 different owners invest from their business to see our distribution network come into play.
Great.
And we've decided, we've talked to a lot of them, and it's the restaurant scene in St. John is very collaborative, as I mentioned. They're always talking about how do we create a better tourist spot and food presence for the city, not necessarily one against the other.
Yep.
And there's a much higher percentage of the restaurants in St. John that are chef operated or co-owned.
Okay.
Or the person at the top of the business has an investment into the food quality and the image of their business. Where in most other cities in New Brunswick, the restaurants are actually owned by business people who, and the chef, the people who are making the creative side of the decisions are turning over.
Yes.
And you're not branding, and that's why you don't see as many rock star branded chefs or restaurants. And I'd like to see that change, and I see the potential when I go to the restaurant scene in St. John that's been surviving and growing.
Yeah. When you talk about St. John that way, it reminds me of Montreal or maybe some other cities where the restaurateurs, they're in competition with each other, but they recognize how they create that food culture in the community. So when they started working together, I'm thinking specifically of Prince Arthur Street, where they closed off the street, and you bring your own wine, and there's about 15 or 20 restaurants in a 2-block area. So they compete with each other, but they draw people to that area because it's like a small restaurant district. Be fascinating to see if that could happen in some of the other parts of New Brunswick, like learn from their model.
Yeah, well, and I think it takes the individuals. Like, I know one of my big beliefs in food and in business is that we need more passionate, engaged entrepreneurs. We need those individuals who are going to make it happen. This type of project doesn't come from top down. This is not municipal, provincial, or federal politicians suggesting it. And the consumers might think they want it, but it's hard to articulate. I'd love to have this food culture and how to make it happen. It takes those people in the middle who are owning those businesses and operating to come together and collaborate, because no one business could make anything like that happen.
So where are places where that collaboration could happen?
Well, I think that, you see here, we're in St. Andrews now, and I see it there for sure. The only shame with St. Andrews is that it's so seasonal. Like, I can only come here in the summer, but and so that's proof that a smaller community can do it. Food culture-wise, St. Andrews, the only place that would rival St. Andrews, I believe, would be St. John. And the only reason it would do so is because of the seasonality aspect of St. Andrews. And then, I'd love to see more in Moncton, and I'd love to see more in Fredericton. The reality is that those Tri-Cities are where most of our people are, and where I think there's most potential for multiple food establishments to exist.
Yeah.
And there are great companies and restaurants and operations in both Moncton and Fredericton, but I just don't see the collaboration and the engagement.
Yeah. So back to thanks for exploring into the restaurant side of things, which was fun because it will all connect, it will wander all over. Family farms in New Brunswick have been in decline for decades now. I remember a stat from maybe 10 years ago where there once was 1,300, 1,400 family farms. There's now less than 400, something like that. So it gets into economies of scale. I remember we interviewed Peter Linfield one time on this show. Peter was great, macroeconomic theory and how things connect. What's happening over here in the world, so New Brunswick better wake up to some things. And it became very clear through the pieces and parts of his conversation that our province should pay attention to how we feed ourselves and to how we kind of house ourselves. Because the more things go global, the more if you can take care of your core, then that stuff can all happen, and it's good. And food's a main driver of that. So I asked him about, locally grown food market stuff, this stuff that you're right in the middle of, and he went sideways a little bit and into organic and talked about Maine and what was happening in Maine. But you're in the thick of it. So do you think there's a solid potential for developing that locally grown food, hits restaurants, hits households, hits supermarket chains? Do we have enough farms to help support it, or will this encourage the farms to start to?
Oh yeah, that is the crux of everything I'm doing right now, because I firmly believe there's potential. In fact, I believe there's probably more potential for that growth here than in other provinces in Canada. And I've just recently gone to Ontario and BC and down to Vermont and throughout New England researching this. I really see that I guess so. So to just step back a bit, there is a definite decline in the farmers or the production side of what we have in the province, and that happened. In the last 2 to 3 decades, there was a lot of unfortunate situations as new supermarket models come in. A lot of family farms and small-scale farms. There was no market for them to get to. There was a lot of devastation, and. But the truth of the matter is, the small-scale independent grocer that was buying from local producers, that model was never not profitable. That model was only ousted by the larger models for the most part because they could maximize profit. So you were making a few extra cents on everything as opposed to before. And you see a lot of people moving back to supporting local. The unfortunate thing is we've gone almost too far. The average age of a producer in New Brunswick is over 65, I believe, right now. Yep. We lose more suppliers every year to retirement or age than we gain. But in New Brunswick, because there's no distributor, wholesaler, processor, or end market that's really supporting local, and there's no systems or processes or places for farmers to go to access the market, because really they have to do everything. They have to, if you're a producer in New Brunswick or a new farmer, there's a list of new farmers looking to open in New Brunswick, and they're in their 30s or 40s. They've got all kinds of experience. They've got the resources. You can buy a farm that could be an organically grown farm, 50 acres, a house and a barn for under $100,000 in New Brunswick. You just can't access the market because you have to go to a farmer's market. Well, most of them have lineups, and you'd be ages building a clientele week by week. Yep. You can run your own CSA or community supported agriculture box program, but really, unless you really want to do the marketing and the business and the customer service and as well as produce food, that's not for you, and that's where a lot of the difficulty is. And unless you have the temperament to be able to go in and and the time to go in to talk to a number of different small retailers and chefs, you can't access that market. And the reality is that restaurants don't represent high volume. No. They're typically smaller orders, and they have a smaller budget than the average consumer, and they have a lot more quality standards or size standards or consistency standards that they have to follow. So the reality of our world is I guess, just to take out some of the feel-good story out of it and to make it just a business problem is a problem of aggregation. I mean, the supermarket chains are trying to buy local. I know that now Sobeys has a local food position for the Atlantic region, and their job is to come in and take out all the barriers. They're allowed to pay for food right when it arrives. They're allowed to allow food to go into one store as opposed to all stores. They're allowed to, give them shelf space with no extra costs and no fees. And even with all that issue, they're having massive difficulties because the reality of the situation is in New Brunswick, because there's no distributor or wholesaler or connection, that person still has to go to every individual producer. And the realities of that don't fit supermarket. They don't fit institutions. So our current business plan started mostly because we had 2 schools trying to buy from us. Yes. And they don't have time to go to every food producer. And then I need to get into another problem. They also don't want tomatoes. They want tomato sauce. And there's nowhere in Atlantic Canada that processes tomatoes in a food safe facility. But that's phase 2, food processing, but it's needed. So yeah, you need to have somewhere in the middle. An example would be when I lived overseas, when you went to a supermarket and say Belgium or Luxembourg or Germany or France, or these are communities I was in, you go to a supermarket and the produce of that supermarket is as likely to be down the road or somewhere else in the country as it is from somewhere like California or Southern America. Yep. And that's not the case here. You would be extremely surprised to find something from New Brunswick in the grocery store, and it happens, but it's very infrequent and it's a matter of note, but it's not overseas. And our thought on that is that when supermarket economies or that grocery model came to Europe, they had so many distribution chains and networks already built, that those systems were able to feed the supermarket network. So I know a producer in the Netherlands that they still grow all the turnips and the cabbage and everything they always grew for hundreds of years because the farming family's been there for hundreds of years. Yeah. And just at the end of the month or whenever they harvest, they drop it off the depot that feeds the institutional food supply, food management, supermarket distribution systems, because that system of getting it to market already existed. There was in-between businesses handling the sales and where it goes and the direction. we don't have any middle industry in the province of New Brunswick. So there's nobody handling the customer service, that's feeding the food where it needs to be, who needs to buy it. There's no one-stop shop or one-place call for the people trying to buy it. And I'm not saying we need to become that scale in supermarket and large, but there's got to be somebody in the middle who's making those systems work.
Especially in this era of, in a bigger picture of economy and New Brunswick's economy, the last election was all talking about jobs and the economy and not about other things that would then feed or support a better economy. It's like we're still stuck in a groove from the 1950s or 60s when it comes to talking about economy. Tends to be still focused on industrial, and industrial needs create jobs on that scale. But some of that won't get us the next 20 years. Some people say that's a sunset industry, whether it's forest products at that scale. And yet right in our own backyard is this food exploration and food emergence that we didn't have before. It's like it needs to arrive at a certain point in time when people like yourself or more organic farmers pop up, more people ready to run farms, and then develop the rest of the pieces. So wouldn't it be nice to put that as an election platform or to have it part of the bigger narrative of the province? People used to say New Brunswick's built on 3 Fs, forestry, fishing, and farming. Lots of attention on forestry and lots of attention on fishing, but the farming conversation doesn't. You'll be one of the drivers of that as we move forward.
Well, and it's important. So my personal opinions, and we try to we stay very nonpartisan and very neutral on everything except for food. Nonpartisan food education information is really our goal at Real Food. I can tell you everything. But for us, me personally, I believe that there's no point in having government support if you don't have people on the ground level ready to take the change. There's no. I mean, it's not a waste of time. It's a valuable conversation, but coming up with a solution with no idea who's going to implement or what it'll cost, or somebody who has the time and energy to go into that. And part of our problem isn't just the decline of the supermarkets coming in. I mean, in every industry across the world, well, I only know in our region in Canada, there was a trend over the past generation, at least, if not further back, where children stopped taking the profession of their parents. I mean, it's no longer a guarantee that a plumber's son is going to become a plumber, or a welder's son, or cobbler's son, or daughter is going to take the profession. But in farming, that was so integral to the operation, and there was no apprenticeship, and there was very little succession planning outside of family. And so a lot of our troubles I see in producers now is that they have this farm, and they might be in their 70s or 80s. Their children have moved on to other careers, and the idea of giving your farm and letting it go to somebody else that's not your family, that maybe even an immigrant or not from the area, there's a major gap. And we're just now coming to the point where people are starting to see, or there's actually farms that have gone empty because of that, that are no longer farms. So we've come to this point where there's not enough people at the table for you to really push it in politics. I mean, it should be an issue, and the purchasing and the procurement, and those are the things I want to concentrate on, is make sure there's a window for markets to develop. But I see a lot of programming existing for supporting producers to want to open a farm or become organic, and the problem isn't the support from the government, no matter who the government might be. The problem is right now you're trying to demand solutions, and there's you're not going to tell somebody in their 60s and 70s to essentially start a business, because if you're not expanding, a lot of them are in the sunset of their careers, or they should be. So you need the 30-somethings who are seeing the potential, the viability, and there's some that are new farmers now, and the reality is that food production, for the most part, as a generality in New Brunswick, has been more of a vocation. Like, you go into farming in New Brunswick in the last 10 years for the same reasons you go into the priesthood. And it has nothing to do with having a viable business model that's going to pay your mortgage, that you're going to be able to hire employees and expand your business and grow it and create jobs. That's not really been part of the picture. It's been a lifestyle. It's been, this is what I want to do, and I want to see better food for my family, not seeing the economic side. And that's where we kind of, us, and then there's other people out there that are making those leaps, and they're all in their 30s or 40s or 50s, they're really making an effort. But that's where it rests, is the I say the entrepreneur, but really it doesn't have to be an entrepreneur as much as an entrepreneurial individual willing to put in the hours.
You make so many great points, especially the one about land and that connection to the land and handing it off to a stranger. And yet at some point then transition needs to be facilitated, needs to happen. We need to be able to feed ourselves. And food needs to become sexy again. I mean, in some ways it kind of is, but you bring in that business model part of it, and it sounds much more like the social entrepreneurship jargon or direction. But how fascinating to take that and superimpose that on top of one of the old core values about our relationship with the land and the food we grow to feed ourselves. So is there a group of you, like is there a subculture starting to emerge of, do you have a network that's making this happen, or are you kind of a lone wolf kind of blazing the trail?
I have different groups everywhere. I have the restaurant crowd and network, because I believe that building our culture around the chefs and the farmers and building some of that sexiness, the rock stars. I mean, I always say we don't have any rock stars in food in New Brunswick, because you can be really good at what you do, but rock stars are good at what they do and they're known for it everywhere. And we just don't have those personalities.
They're a brand or a label.
They're
or
a brand, and
whatever.
so having that tourism culture sexiness is a part of my network, and that's talking to restaurants and some of the food producers that are national and trying to brand New Brunswick products. And then I pay a lot more attention lately to what I see missing in that whole food sector, because there's a lot of people helping with food security and who are passionate and activist about, you know, more local food, supporting farmers, getting food to those who can't afford it, getting food into schools. And it's really important, but there's a lot of people there ready to support that. So where I see the gap that maybe I can bring the most value is I spend a lot of time with the larger business and the higher stakes entrepreneurial networks, like the Wallace McCain Institute off of UMB and the Entrepreneurial Leaders Program, 21 Inc. Emerging Leaders, the Pond Deshpande Institute, started by Jerry Pond and Raj Deshpande, and putting somebody who's devoted to food in those networks and recognizing that food, whether you're a farmer or whether you're a restaurant owner or whether you're a distributor or a food processor, you are an entrepreneur. You have the same difficulties and challenges as the IT company, or the Radian 6 who has to expand, hire people, and there's a potential exit. Most farmers have huge business plans, or they should. Big dollars, big investments, long-term returns, HR problems, investment issues. And so I'm trying to bring the entrepreneur, like these are businesses, and trying to pair it with the social good as well.
Yeah, you get a lot of that of stories out of the West in terms of the scale, the farming business scale. So Manitoba has major floods. The government sets up a funding agency to get short-term loans out so you can have the money to buy your seed, so you can get it in the ground because it spoiled last year's crop, and there was, or the grain didn't move quick enough out of the grain elevators out west, and so they had last year's crop still sitting in the grain elevators, which meant they had no sales, therefore no cash for buying this year's stuff. It quickly becomes complicated, I don't know, but it quickly becomes something more than just growing the food. So that's fascinating with getting that to work for New Brunswick. I'm wondering in the food world and the growing world, if it's not that New Brunswick's behind, but some stuff has been sort of left. So is it going to be one of those windows where we're so far behind we get to leap ahead? So when you describe the farm, but pushing it to social entrepreneurship, so there's the farm and there's all the IT infrastructure to the farm, not just for production, but for how to get it out, how to do inventories. Not that everything's barcoded, but there's a whole mesh that's going to happen with how you produce the food, with how it goes the rest of its journey.
You could say that we are leapfrogging. Like Real Food Connections is, we are devoted to the small to medium scale, small producer, family businesses. We have over 120 different producers that we buy from. It's important to note that local food isn't just produce. I know that usually comes to that conversation, but there's over 70 cheeses made in the province. There's more meats that we produce in the province than you see in a superstore or Sobeys. There's a lot of stuff going on. And then we sort of aggregated or brought together, all the different food and where it's from, and we have a grocery store that's, your traditional small niche market store. But and as we talked about before the show, like part of our investment that you don't see in farmers markets or small local food stores is that we spend half of our week online. We do website sales in 3 cities. We do home grocery delivery. We do Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and Instagram and Pinterest and YouTube, and we run an online newsletter, and we run blogging articles and videos, and that wasn't possible 5 years ago. We weren't able to connect. So for a relatively low investment, we're connecting the bounty of what is produced in the province to everybody, making it convenient, and they might not all come into the store and buy it, but we're able to access that audience. So people know that it's in existence. I think that we're also going to be able to take advantage of best practices from other regions, like you see in Ontario, even Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has 2 associations that I wish we had in New Brunswick. One is Select Nova Scotia, and one is Taste of Nova Scotia. And between the 2, they feature the producers and the restaurants and the hotels that do local food, and they represent producers at trade shows outside of Nova Scotia, and they branded Nova Scotia's culinary scene. Very cool. In PEI, you see Chef Michael Smith, who is he does a lot of great things on his own, and his name's on everything, but he's an ambassador for the island, well supported by tourism PEI. So like there's these different groups that they've pushed forward that have succeeded, where in New Brunswick we're still just deciding what direction we want to go. We have no one showcasing us, no one, bringing the sexiness to food.
This is so awesome. Like someone can watch this show, make notes, and then they can run off in 1,000 directions with possible future business opportunities. And the license plates, instead of be in this place, it should be eat in this place. Right?
Well, yeah, we're not the drive-through province. We're the drive-through and eat province.
There we go. So diners, drive-ins, and dives. But New Brunswick version. Actually, there's probably a lot of merit in some of that stuff, isn't there? Places to go around. Food also ties to how we are as a community and our identity, which is what you're talking about. Do you think, what would you like to see for New Brunswick's identity, food identity? Have you played with what that could be? You kind of touched on it with what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, we're concentrating on making it available right now. Like get a basic network in place that food created anywhere, especially we're concentrating the southern half of the province, because the reality is from Centerville to Miramichi, there's a line that's really difficult to cross and a distribution way to get to the northern half. But in southern New Brunswick, and eventually all of New Brunswick, and eventually throughout Atlantic Canada, to make those connections that food can move from point A to B to C to D relatively easily. Even if there's a higher price, right now most of those connections aren't possible. You can't get cheeses from Caracat or from Woodstock or from Rexton to a place in St. John. Like there's no one you call, there's no delivery service. So we're concentrating on making it available. And that's once that's complete, I think there's a lot of stuff that we can make happen. We can help other businesses and restaurants and retailers brand. We can give them the information, the story. We can we can put together the books and the TV shows and the documentaries and the cool stuff. But right now, if we support an industry with as little connection as there is now, it's not going to support. You're just going to hit these shortfalls in supply. You're going to irritate the consumer. I know that my personal opinion on food culture, and I've wanted to start a few foodie events on this, and hopefully you'll see it down the road, is embracing what New Brunswick food culture is. And every city sort of has its own thing, and every restaurant chef has its own opinion. But one of the neat things we have in the province of New Brunswick is you have Acadian culture, you have English and Irish and Scottish cultures, and you have First Nations culture, and they all have very distinct food traditions. And I think there's some really neat stuff happening when all those collide. And I know a lot of people in Fredericton, where we're both from, that don't know anything about First Nations foods and don't know anything about Acadian foods. But if you're in Moncton, everybody knows Acadian foods, and maybe they don't know the Scottish. And a lot of it's no longer pure Scottish, it's come in and become an East Coast dish. So I'd really like to see, not necessarily a melding pot of New Brunswick cuisine, but a New Brunswick that champions the cool things from all three, showing that we're not necessarily bringing us all into one uniform, evolved state, but we're an embracing of the three. Like I'd really like to see those 3 different food cultures. Well, one of them's a big melding pot of its own, but
it's like we should have a big open space forum at the Moncton Coliseum, and everybody bring a dish.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
but nobody should do that unless there's somebody who's going to write down the recipes and write a book, or put it on TV and make a TV show. And because at the end of the day, if you can't prove that that's a good idea worth somebody paying for, then at the end of the day, we need to find another way to do it. I mean, I believe in doing things for the good of the economy and to build ourselves socially and all these things. But if there's not an end stage where it can be sustainable on its own, then you got to step back. Because all of our events we treat them as education or marketing. But if there's no point in educating somebody unless I think that down the road there's a model where that continues.
yeah, it completes the circle.
Yeah.
A bit of a divergence from that, but it's connected, the social entrepreneurship side. It seems like from an outsider's perspective, there's two competing views on the definition of success. So one of them is the Radian 6 discussion, where the measure of success was, here's some investment dollars, go do your thing. 5 or 6 years later, there's a cash out, and there's news stories and big dollars involved. And then another version of success is the home hardware store that's been there for 50 years. There's no big cash out, but it has long-term stability, long-term impact into a community and for relationships and stuff. And it seems like there's a tension between those two versions of success. Have you come across any of that yet? So how could a farm ever have a big cash out like Radian 6, even though it follows the same social entrepreneurship model? Or can we start to value again the quality of life and work and contribution that can come from the long-term model rather than the five-year flip it model?
I think it's just a matter of being honest with what your definition of success is. So, I mean, Radian 6 is intent when they started, and their promise to the people who invested in them, emotionally and with money, was that they were going to exit and that there was going to be a financial payback. And what's amazing, and just as a final, like the people who were involved in that and who succeeded and had that big success have all remained completely engaged in their communities around New Brunswick. So there's like that. That's a success story as well. But you talk to the home hardware or the restaurant owner that's been around forever, or the farmer that's been around forever, and they have successful businesses. I think we first of all should showcase those successes more. I mean, at the high school and university level, I do a lot of public speaking, and I go to a lot of entrepreneurship classes that talk about Rogers, Ford, and Amazon. And they don't equate to the cafe owner, the farmer. It's like having them in as business champions in their community. I think that's going to be a big step. Yeah. But also for those individuals, because really a lot of those, the home hardware owner who's had a business, he doesn't probably care. He sees himself as a success because his goal when he started it was not to flip it. Because you don't start that business with a flip. My business, Real Food Connections, I'll be honest, didn't start out, and I still don't. My definition of success is not to have a successful retail store. My definition of success is going to be some of the changes we make in the province and the way local food gets in. Now, my success depends on a successful retail grocery store in that mix. Yes. But when we have real measurable change and a difference, that's where my success is. And whether I make it really good financially or not isn't going to change my definition of success. And whether, depending on how the news sees it, that's not really going to affect me. So I think it's individual. I think a lot of people play it back and forth, but the individuals in the businesses, they just need to be honest with themselves and shoot for their personal success. Yeah.
And thank you for that, because that's part of a narrative that we can't find very often, especially in mainstream media, that just a simple conversation is, what do you consider successful? And it gets caught up in partly old traditions on how we see economy. So this is successful. And we're stuck on that track in a lot of ways, whether it's Crown Lines management or pipelines or shale gas. It's not about the details of each of those conversations. It's about the framework within which we have this assumption that we all share in this definition of success. So it's really important at this point in time to hear the other stories of what's considered successful, and that they get equal time. So being in business for 40 years or creating a social change that in turn gave me back a stability of quality of life.
Like, I can't wait. Social entrepreneurship or just socially conscious corporate activity is going to become more and more the norm. I mean, I see people coming into university now, and they don't split it. It's like, while if a business can make money and perform social good, that's obviously the way I need to go. I know that one of the just because I love the example is one of the books I read when we were doing this business plan was I can't remember the title of the book, but it's all about Ben and Jerry's growth and sale,
social corporate responsibility,
and they believe in a term called linked prosperity, and linked prosperity is very much in tune, and I never was able to articulate it until I read that book, but the idea that the shareholder does receive value, and that's your end goal, is to provide value to the shareholder, but not at the expense of the stakeholder, and having them up at the same level. So for them, it's the employees and the suppliers and the community around where their business operates. All three of them have to prosper for them to give a share of profits back to. So they have to have healthy suppliers, which means they have to pay more. They have to have healthy employees, which means they need a better living wage and better treatment. And they have to be environmentally sound and sustainable for their community around. I love that, and they return a great return to their shareholder on top of all that. We along that lines, to help us in developing those policies and measuring them, because I believe in measuring is very important. I mean, it's too easy to say what you are doing without putting numbers and some measurements on. But we're looking at the B Corp certification, which I don't know if you've ever heard of. Benefit Corporation is what it stands for, and it's a worldwide thing. There's only 2 companies in New Brunswick that have currently qualified, but it's a third party, fairly difficult to receive certification that comes in, and it's weeks of inspection and through your paperwork and all. It does the entire supply chain from where the raw materials come from to the point of sale in your company, and you get scored. And you have to have over a certain score to be certified, and you can be recognized on a world scale as a conscious corporation, and it's really amazing. I know that Picaroons is currently going through the certification, and they have been for quite a while, and I've been watching that. We're looking at it as well. There's all kinds. It's how you treat your employees. It's how you treat your suppliers. What type of suppliers? So if your supplier way back, if you're a coffee company looking to certify, they go back and check your original bean growers. And it's the only certification that goes through the entire chain. And we're looking at it because it also gives us, no matter what we score the first time, it gives you plans to measure and change all of the stuff you do that's socially conscious, and you can start putting a value on the social side of your business, which is really exciting for us. It also makes you, one of the things that's kind of neat is it makes you go into your bylaws and the articles of your corporation, and you have to put stakeholder above shareholder or at the same level in the bylaws, which changes the way that corporations work.
That is absolutely awesome, and you're making my heart really glad, because in my past lives I ran volunteer organizations. That social consciousness thing was the flip side. I was on the asking side for that stuff to make Special Olympics work, or Family Resource Center, or the Trails Council. The Faith Popcorn did a book at the end of the 90s called The Popcorn Report. She was studying megatrends, and one of them was, if you're a corporation, you better start lining up with some social ethics, because at some point the consumer is going to complete that circle of the relationship, and your consumer behavior. And
the employees won't want to work for you.
Yeah, although the business section every day is filled with that tension and that strife, whether it's bank behavior and the number of fines going down, or even driving up today. There was a story about Lloyd's Bank is going to lay off 3,000, 4,000 people, because the primary responsibility is to the shareholder, not the stakeholder. So the language is great, the intent is great, and if we can make more and more of that happen, that'd be wonderful. At the economic summit that was hosted in 2010 by Business New Brunswick, or the council, Business Council New Brunswick, I had a chance to participate and had a chance to offer up that one point, that very same point, is why don't businesses in New Brunswick index their contributions to community to their gross profits? Have some sort of feedback loop. It wasn't received well. It was silent. There was no response. It was more about government procurement policies and that sort of stuff. So change is going to come from your level at that organic grassroots up and doing it. Have you ever seen another change of direction? That Hellman's video clip of where food comes from in Canada? With it. Wouldn't it be fun to do a version of that for New Brunswick?
Yeah.
You probably have a version of it in your head already.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of videos and versions. It's like you need to get to a certain point where those financial investments make sense.
Yeah, but that's a key point, and you keep returning to it, which is great, in that there is a business model that needs to be applied or adapted to make sure that this thing actually works.
Well, and investing even government dollars to get the government to do a video to feature New Brunswick. Like if you don't invest in the system before to handle the extra growth, then you're putting more business on a structure that can't handle it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm all about supporting, but like our plan and what we want to see happen is all about like prepare for growth 4 years from now.
Okay.
Because right now, if you start telling people to go buy local, the first thing that's going to happen is that they're going to go to the farmer's market and everybody's going to be out of food.
Yeah.
I know we learned this lesson the hard way, but 2 years into business, we'd go to a farmer in the late fall, early winter, and said, I think that I'm going to need like 10,000 pounds of onions to get through the winter, and I'd like to give you that contract. I'd like to buy them from you. And they said, oh, that's great, but you needed to tell me last January because I didn't grow them for you.
Yeah. So the cycle's like an 18-month cycle or a 12-month cycle?
It just depends on what you're producing. So now, like we had to come up with a whole system for giving what we call, we used to call it contract cropping, but most people aren't looking for contracts. What we're doing is we're giving a purchase guarantee, a handshake agreement. It's on paper, but everybody calls it a handshake agreement. That if you grow this, we will buy it at this predetermined price and this predetermined quality and size and shape. And that was a necessary step in our growth. But that only leads us to a certain amount of percentage growth in a year, or we'll run out again. Mm-hmm. So it has to happen in controlled steps. And I would love to get grants and do big videos and showcase, but we're 4 years of those steps from being able to handle the potential business that could come in. If 10% of what people go to the supermarket and buy today wanted to shift to locally grown, we don't produce enough food. Mm-hmm. We can in a few years, when we build the trust and give the guarantees and commit on the other end. Okay. But right now, it just can't happen that quickly, or the whole system won't be sustainable.
That's great. You're offering us an insight into where it's going, but it's also positive because it is going.
Yeah.
And this is a conversation that you couldn't find in other places about what are part of the economic solutions for the province. And I can't help but think too about a retention strategy or an attraction strategy for young people. Because if you're creating this new subculture or culture around food and in its networks, then that's got to be attractive for some young people to want to either stay here, that ongoing debate about how do we keep young people to stay here, or how do we create jobs, or how do we get them to move back. Because the next generation, Richard Florida's stuff on creative class, the 25 to 35, 40-year-olds don't just work for paycheck, they work for a whole quality of life.
Yeah.
And this fits right into it.
Yeah. And even on that, I firmly believe that every student needs to leave. They really need to get, because everybody I know, the most passionate people driving our province forward today are all people who at one point left.
Yes. And
either saw how it was being done other places, or they went in and had a direct comparison shown to them of what we could have or should have back home, and they're coming back. And so I think the message is making sure that we're the kind of place where you want to come in your late 30s, early 40s back and really contribute, than to stay and work a minimum wage or even a $14, $15, $16 an hour job in New Brunswick. Bring some of the stuff back. Like that's really where I want to see it go.
That's one of those challenges around that narrative theme about how do we keep our young people here. I want to kind of go, no, they're supposed to go away. Every province has the same process. And it's part of the process of growing up. It's part of the spiritual journey. It's you got to leave home in order to decide if you want to come back home. You know, those are important things. But if you create this wonderful, happy place to live that's got good food and good water and some creativity to it or some juice to it.
And challenge to it. That's the other thing, is most of these people who are creatively influenced and they have other intrinsic or extrinsic motivations aside from just money, they also want to be challenged, is the studies I've seen. Like they really want to come back and they want to be able to engage and challenge, and they're not necessarily looking for it to be easy. They're looking for to create change and to be challenged intellectually and, socially to make a difference. And back here, I know that I've been all over Canada and the States, and I've been in Europe, and one person articulated why, because I knew that I wanted to come back here. I knew that I wanted to make change here. And I've only been in business for 4 years, and we get on the media a lot, and we get in the news, and we've won some awards, and I'm in a lot of groups, and a lot of people are like, it's like, why, like if you go to Toronto, this is unheard of, and we have this great like big fish, little pond. Like anybody who really goes out and makes a big difference or is passionate about anything, can talk to anybody in New Brunswick they want. I can go to the mayor, I can go to the premier, I can go to the business leaders, as long as I have something that's really worth saying. And get, it's a really neat connection. I like coming back to New Brunswick, and I like being able to be that big fish in a little pond.
Yeah, because you have access.
Yeah,
one person really can shake the tree pretty good and then make stuff happen.
Yeah.
Another direction tied to food. Another video clip was somewhere over in Europe, I believe it was in France. There's an awful lot of produce that is misshapen.
The crooked vegetables.
Yeah, isn't that fun?
Yeah.
And by the way, we'll have links for this all listed so you can see what we're referring to. So is there a chance for that here? Because some of it's quite funny.
Yeah. What we don't have is the budget to have a great TV show about it, but it's already happening.
Okay.
The secondary crops in New Brunswick are one that it's actually a big part of our business plan, because we want to do prepared foods. We want to do your take-home soups.
Okay.
Your ready-to-eat, but sustainably grown and locally grown foods. And one of the opportunities we have is that most producers don't pick everything or have these secondary grades that they don't sell at a farmer's market because it's seen to represent them as a person and as a business. And as grocery stores don't typically buy because they're trying to buy the best thing for the shelf. Where yes, we do bring in secondary grades in the store, and they're a reduced cost for those who want them. But the truth is that most people are still buying the pretty ones. But where the really potential is if we can start an industry that's doing the foods for there's 24 schools in the province looking for 30% locally grown. There's a number of other community centers, businesses, daycares, seniors' homes. They're looking for those things, and that's where we really might be able to make it so that what was wastage for a farm or being tilled under for extra nutrients in the soil, we can turn that into some revenue for them and a cost-effective way of getting local, healthier food into those places, like institutions, is really where we want to tie that connection. But we've been doing ugly vegetables forever, and they're great. I love the way the ad is really spotlighted, because everybody comes in the store asking about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, we don't have the marketing campaign, but the crooked carrots are right over there.
Yeah. Or the other root vegetables that'll look like people, or get some weird shape to them, and then there's a story attached to it. And
different colors, shapes, sizes. Just variety in general, not even secondary grade. But I know that there's the last list I saw on an agriculture website in New Brunswick that said sort of what was grown in the province of New Brunswick has 67 different types of produce on it. We keep purchasing records every week for the past 4 years, and I know in the last year and a half or so, we have purchased somewhere around 170 different types of produce grown in the province of New Brunswick.
Goodness.
So it's like there's a lot of variety out there that's being grown that people don't know about, and you get into describing to a customer how to use kohlrabi or braco verde or some of these interesting different things.
Yeah, and food literacy stuff.
Yeah, and we're just making it cool and interesting with recipes.
Another step in another direction related to food is cost of food. So media will always talk about the consumer price index, talk about how food costs are going up. There's 3 or 4 stories right here about better get ready, your pocketbook's going to get smacked because food prices are going up. What's it like from your end? Another old myth, or I think it's an old myth, so is that organic's more expensive than eating, buying the cheaper foods? Even though the food quality and nutrient value is higher in the organic than the other, so they zero the argument out that way. Can you speak into the cost on the consumer side and maybe give us some lessons about why it works? Why buying local works?
Cost is a bit more complicated discussion because local, sustainable, and organic, on average, tends to be more expensive here. And the reason for that, not thinking about supermarkets, but the reason why generally it's more expensive in our communities is not necessarily because they're organic. It's because they're smaller scale businesses.
Yes, it's the economy of scale again. Because you had talked about 4 years from now, this will click.
Yeah.
But right now, it's under this kind of tension or pull or growth pain.
Yeah. So it's just like if you have most of our organic farmers are smaller farmers around here, and they have 2, 3, 4 people working the farm, all family. They sell most of it at a farmer's market, and they don't really want to grow their business past a certain point. They want it to be a lifestyle business. Well, the prices of what they produce will always be higher than the business that has invested in bigger equipment or more space and employees and has some kind of economy and a higher volume of sales. That is very confused in the marketplace when you look at just the shelf price.
Yes.
Good so point. If you, like one of the examples I often use is organic potatoes. Organic potatoes, I grew up in Keswick Ridge, New Brunswick, which is just outside of Fredericton. And one of my favorite growers in that region is an organic producer who's been around at the farmer's market forever. It's Karen Davidge at Good Spring Farm. And she produces organic seed potatoes and organic eating table potatoes and has for decades. And wholesale and at the market, she's getting somewhere between $2.50 to $5 to $6 a pound for the products she's growing and has been growing forever, and they're delicious. We're buying certified organic potatoes for our store from an organic potato farmer in Jacksonville, 5-tier farms, Ernie Culberson, and he doesn't want to do a farm market. He doesn't want to do direct consumer. He wants to grow potatoes in a more commercial way, only using organic standards, and he wants to sell to a distributor or to larger stores or to bigger customers at a higher volume, and he's selling 55, 65, 75 cents a pound. It's a huge difference.
Yes.
It's almost $2-3 a pound. Same quality organic standards of potatoes, similar varieties, although there's a few neat varieties that Karen's growing. And that has nothing to do with the organic. They're both certified organic. So it really spotlights the difference.
So that's what, without knowing the backstory, that's what the consumer sees when they go out to buy their potatoes. They see that range of difference.
Well, yeah. So if I was a store selling, cheaper potatoes from, say, Harvey's Big Potato, which is still locally grown, local family outside of Fredericton, and I had a bag of Karen Davidge's, on a 5-pound bag, there will be $10 difference.
And there'd be a lot of people going, huh?
Yeah.
on that.
So it's not an easy conversation. It's one we have often.
Yeah.
And each category of food also has different principles.
Yeah.
There's very little wastage in cheese, for example, because it wax wheels. Cheese prices are actually quite good. There's currently nobody in New Brunswick trying to make cheap cheese. So we're not hitting the same prices of the big blocks of orange stuff at the supermarket.
Yeah.
But as a name brand or quality cheese market, we're right there competitive or better with like your aged cheddars and your premium brand cheeses, because the only companies in New Brunswick who make cheese want to make a premium cheese.
Yep.
It's not really that it's more expensive because it's local.
Yeah.
There's one area that I know that will always be more expensive, and really it should be more expensive, and that's when you get into the meat. The cheaper meat you get at supermarkets are, if it's really cheap, somebody else in the supply chain is paying that cost. And whether it's subsidized or whether it's low paid labor or whether it's the quality of life for the animal, or there's somebody taking up that cost. And I've never been shown different. Every time I've gone down that rabbit hole of commercial meat production, somebody's paying. And we believe, and we're not all organic, because organic meat production there's very little in New Brunswick. But what we promise our customers, and we tour the farms and we get some documents on how they're growing, is that we have really happy animals that had one bad day. That's what we're shooting for. And that will cost more. But we can tell, honestly, who got that money. I mean, there's some in the middle there for us. We're very clear on what our markup and our margin is. So if one farmer's meat is one price and the next one is way higher, way lower, we have the same percentage markup on everything. So the customer, that we use supplier-driven pricing, the supplier sets the price, knowing, because they know our markup, what the end price of the consumer will be. But yeah, meat should be more expensive in most cases. But it's going up rapidly, like you mentioned in these articles, at the supermarket level. And I've gone in 2 or 3 times and found the cheapest chicken breast at the supermarket level within $1 a kilo as our free-range, outdoor-grown Happy Birds that we sell.
I want to, because we're getting near the end, we have about 5 minutes left. The Happy Birds, or Had One Bad Day. it's really important, I feel, to tap into the soul or the spirit of things. And food feeds us, not just the nutrient value, but there's a spiritual or there's another energy that's part of it. So to know where the food comes from that you put in your mouth to nourish yourself is important, but also to know the experience of that food. So when you give respect and recognition to the food before you eat it, or as you grow it, or respect the water, has that woven its way into, I mean, you've done it lightly by saying, oh, they were happy, and then they had one bad day. Same thing applies to vegetables in a way, like you can play music to plants and they grow better. In that spirit of that kind of thing, is there something that could be part of the breakthrough? Or what are your feelings about that connection between the emotional energy, the spiritual energy that goes into food production, which then in turn comes back into our own bodies?
Yeah, I think that, the way I've sort of articulated it has been, I think that people need to value food more in their lives. And you see in other places in the world, it's a part of your community, it's the center of your family unit, it's the part of your area, you're very much in touch with what grows around you and how it's slaughtered and how it's cooked and prepared. And we, over the last couple of decades, have been taking, food preparation out of the family unit. How many TV dinners and, less cooking as a family. You're taking out, I talk to people all the time, and well older than me, that have never cooked a chicken or a roast, or you're taking the production out. And that's a family social unit. You're taking out eating together as a family unit or as a community unit. You see less and less of that. You're taking the connection from the producer and where your food comes from. You've taken that out. So that's where I think a lot of the soul has been taken out of connection with the food. So it's not just, I guess, the spiritual connection to the people producing the food, but it's also all the ways that we engage and use food as a community center, a family center, and a cultural center. And the one way we want to improve that, and this is sort of a personal goal that's not in the business plan, is if we can build higher expectations for what people are looking for, and we can increase the value of food. If people valued food more, they'd cook more, they'd waste less, they'd eat together, and they'd talk more. A lot of, in the pipe dream of mine is, here's this whole tick box list of social ills that could be cured if you just valued food more in your daily life and put more of your time, a higher percentage of your time and a higher percentage of your wallet into such a crucial part of your lives.
That's awesome. We're going to pull that as a soundbite. That's great. No, seriously, it's great. We're almost done. Final thoughts? Anything you want to end with?
Well, we're about to go through a lot of change, as you mentioned. Today's the 28th. We have 9 days left before the end of our fundraise campaign, and we're doing investments. That's done on the 6th of November. If we're successful, which all signs point to us being successful, then it'll be a much different world. We have the backings. We have over 100 individual invested community members from across the province today. If we move forward, we're no longer going to be looking to talk about what are the solutions. We're starting a 2-year trip of implementation to practice what we preach. We've been running a store and a company for a while, but this will be, this is all the things I think can happen if it was properly funded and we had the right people at the steering wheel. For the next 2 years, we'll actually put that into play, measure it, see what works, what didn't work, and I'm hoping that in 2 years we can either replicate and grow, or we can help other people enter. Because I think we're collaborative by nature, but the success of this is that we encourage others to enter the same party. So I'm just hoping people stay in tune and keep in communication and join the party.
It's been an incredible, edible interview. We very much appreciate it.
Okay.
We're done. As always, be good, have fun, and love each other.